lunch too, and I really should have skipped the grilled Ewok.
Are you enjoying yourself in the Bay Area?
I am. I've only just got here, 11 hours on a plane. It was worth it. You're also friendly, there's so many of you, and it's very nice to see Star Wars fans in this part of the world.
Basically, how's fans been treating you? Because I can identify with a lot of people here because these are my people. And so how are you? I know you've been doing this forever.
I have been forever and a day.
Yeah, so how are you enjoying it?
Well, it was, of course, to begin with, it was a complete surprise. But actually, to begin with, it was no surprise at all because, as you all know, I was under this mask. So no one knew what I looked like. In fact, Dennis Lawson, who you probably know is in Return of the Jedi, Wedge, his name is. He's a very good friend of mine. We sort of grew up together. And he said, I know you work with Mark Hamill a lot, but he's made a special request. I said, what's that? He said, well, he'd like me to invite you to dinner so he could see what you look like. So that went well. And so I was in disguise, literally, for a number of years. And then, of course, George made the big mistake of making the prequels and exposed my face. So from there on, it was either uphill or downhill, depending on the particular circumstances. But by and large, it's been great. It's been fun. Occasionally, it's been a little nerve-wracking, but more often than not, it's been great, like it is today.
Excellent. So, are there any stories that you would like to tell?
Is there anything you want to ask me about?
I don't know.
I mean, there's lots of stories I can tell about lots of movies. Maybe there are questions people here would like to hear.
Well, we're going to do that. We have 2 microphones on either side, and as courtesy for all of us. Can everybody hear my voice okay? Yeah. Good, that's a teacher voice. So there's a microphone on that side and a microphone on that side. Great. And when you line up for questions, just go ahead and line up for questions, be courteous and polite and all that sort of thing. And since we were all family,
you don't have to be that polite.
Right? So I don't have to remind you. But if you're waiting in the aisles, there are people behind you. So if you wouldn't mind just kneeling down or sitting down and being up there for a turn and then you can stand. That way you won't block the view of others. So, left, right, left, right. All right, first person.
Hi Ian, thank you so much for being here.
It's good to be here, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. My question, so fans are divided as to whether Palpatine's disfigured appearance in the later episodes was a result of being deformed by his own Force lightning, or whether that was always his true form, which he was concealing. What's your personal opinion? Do you think that was Palpatine's natural appearance, or was he deformed by his own Force energy?
I always had a feeling that the monster lurked underneath the sort of bland, quite ordinary politician exterior, and was just waiting for its moment to burst forth, which of course it does in Revenge of the Sith. George Lucas said a very interesting thing to me when we were doing the prequels. He said, you should think of your face, i.e. Ian's face, the one you could see as the Senator and the Chancellor, more or less, as a mask, and that underneath is the reality of that character. So it's the most fascinating thing to play if you're an actor. Use your own face as if it was, screwed on, and underneath is this terrible thing, eventually will burst forth. So that was my theory anyway. As we know, the backstory of the Emperor is very vague. In fact, I didn't think he had one. I thought he was just born evil, just a solid block of black horribleness. But apparently there's more to him than that. But I have no clues to offer you. I know some of you have read books, and with all of the anthology series that are going on, maybe we will learn a bit more about him, but maybe we won't. And I suspect you will learn a bit more about him before I do, because that's the way it goes in Star Wars world. But it would be nice to think that he's hovering out there in some form or another.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know, microphones are terrible, aren't they?
Hi, Ian McDiarmid.
Yes, why aren't you on your knees? Oh, no, stand up, the microphone won't come down.
Hi, my name is Jose. I'm from Orange County, California.
Hi, yes.
I just wanted to ask you a question concerning the future of Star Wars. Knowing that you have been with Star Wars for all 6 movies, and knowing that there's also the spin-offs and all this stuff, what is your opinion on like the future and the movies of Star Wars, considering your past with Star Wars?
Well, as we all know, it's going to go on forever. And now the Disney run is going to go on forever and ever. So you can feel confident about that. But I was very excited by the latest movie, as I'm sure you all were, Episode 7, because I thought it was full of wonderful acting, good lines, a strong story, and in a sense it rebooted itself, which things have to do after a while, I think. So the general excitement that it created was certainly what I shared in. My only disappointment was, of course, that I wasn't recreated, that I was, in fact, confined to galactic hell, as George had assured me I was when it happened. I said, when we were doing Return of the Jedi, I said, oh, so what happens to him after? Maybe he comes back as another creature, maybe he could be, I don't know, an interesting kid, or a woman, or a leopard, or, And he said, no, he's dead. So I just had to accept that. But, with the anthology series going, I'm still in charge of the universes. I'm happy to relate to you during the new movie that's about to hit your screens, but I don't make an appearance. But yeah, I know it's a big R. I think if the whole world says R often enough, maybe I'll re-emerge. But Vader's back, albeit briefly, I believe. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. But the great thing about that series is that anything can happen at any time, and there are so many sort of spin-offs. George had a strong idea before he sold the company to do a television series, but they could never get it to work. Believe it or not, financially, it sounds a bit silly, but the digital complications of the work that he wanted to introduce, and he's always reinventing cinema. He always was, every time he did something, and he was going to reinvent television, I think. It was too expensive to get off the ground, but he was still thinking about it. And there are some scripts lurking out there, so maybe Disney will think about it a little harder, and one day we'll get some of those. What interested me, selfishly, about that was he really was going to tell some of the backstory of the Emperor. He didn't, of course, being George, give very much away, but he did mention the word Hitler. So I kept thinking, oh, okay, assassination plots, things like that. And I think it would probably be a little more gruesome than we've seen up till now. But, gruesome's okay.
On the right.
Hi. So, when you were fighting with Mace Windu, and he scarred your face with a force lightning, did that hurt?
Working with Sam Jackson always hurts. Sorry Sam, the opposite is true. We couldn't find a more charming man who turns up every day, learns his lines, is entirely concentrated, and then goes to the golf course. But he was great, and he did most of his fight work, I have to say, and I did very little of mine. I just had to do the close-ups. But I had to learn the routine and so on. I had an absolutely brilliant stunt double, fight double, flying fight double. And his name is Michael Byrne, who deserves all of the credit, really. But I think that he didn't scar my face. I think my face was always scarred, as I said to the gentleman earlier, waiting to be reviewed.
Well, there was also the bit where Darth Vader threw you off the precipice into the abyss, and that also looked like it hurt.
Yes. Well, it took a long time to do, technically. I can tell you, George brought me back several times to Elstree. Wasn't we were Pine, but that was Elstree. And in order to send you down, you have to go up in the movies. You have a harness, and you go like that. And Dave Prowse, who was indeed Darth Vader, he keeps reminding you every time he's a science in orbit voice. He had to have the job of catching my ankles as I was shot up into the air by the people on the wires. And he failed to do so distinctly. So I used to spin around quite happily around the studio sort of endlessly. People would go for lunch, they'd have a chat, they'd think about the next movie, they'd build the sets for the next James Bond film while I was still spinning around the room. But it was worth it. It was a good experience.
Thank you.
Yep. Hello, Ian. Thanks for coming. One of the things I've always loved about the Emperor is the voice. Can you talk about how you developed the voice for the Emperor back in the day?
Sure. Well, it came out of a bad cold one morning. No, it didn't really. No, I saw his face for the first time, and after I passed out, because literally, the best thing you can do when you're being made up over 4 hours, which that first make-up experience in Return of the Jedi took. The best thing you can do is to pass out, really, fall asleep. And as it's 4 o'clock in the morning, that's not too difficult to do. So I did. I took the advice of Nick Dudman, the brilliant designer who was making up my face, and I slept. And then I woke up, of course, looked in the mirror and screamed. But then I saw this horrible sort of toad-like, reptilian-like figure, and I sort of thought he should, sort of, that came into my, phlegm came into my throat, if you'll excuse me. And out of that, an idea for how he might sound came. And I'd also seen a very impressive Japanese company performing in the UK. And the lead actor in that, a young man actually, who was playing in traditional Japanese style, a woman, Medea in fact, had this most extraordinary deep guttural voice, and it seemed to come from, well, almost his stomach. And I thought, well, if I could try and do a bit of that without completely ruining my larynx, that might be an idea. So I practiced it at home, brought it in, and did a bit for George, and filmed the scenes with it. And everyone was, nobody said it was terrible or anything, so I went ahead and did it. Until one day Richard Marquand, the director, as you know, gave me a tape of Clive Rebel, very good actor, who had done the voice in The Empire Strikes Back. But Clive, of course, didn't know he was going to turn, that the character he was then playing was going to turn into this awful-looking monster. So he just sort of done it a bit like Clive, on a bad Monday. And so I thought, well, that's not the voice that he would have done had he seen this film. So anyway, Richard said, okay, just go on doing the voice. And then when we went to do the additional dialogue recording, it's called additional dialogue recording. In fact, in those days, practically the whole movie was post-sync. Because the sound equipment besides the studio, the balance wasn't right. These days, the digital wonders mean that by and large, most of the sound of the actors you hear is actually recorded at the time. There's only little bits added later, and they usually added later because people want to change things, not because of the quality of the sound. But I had to go into the studio in London and post-sync the whole part for George, obviously. And when I walked in, there were Steven Spielberg and Kathy Kennedy, as it happened. I'd not met before, they were charming, they were sort of sitting there and being encouraging. And then when I started the voice, Steven Spielberg said, "Oh my God, so evil, so evil." Thank you. And then I thought, oh well, in a sense, I'm sure I wasn't auditioning, but George had brought them along to see what they thought of the voice and whether this was a good idea or not. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I had that feeling. Anyway, he said I was evil and I passed the test. And you know the rest. And then I quite enjoyed the fact that in the prequels I could sound a bit like I'm sounding now, and the go into that, as once again the monster beneath the skin.
I'd like to ask you about the competing versions and edits of some of the episodes, primarily The Empire Strikes Back, where your character is thrown into the abyss by Darth Vader. And I find that personally I'm quite partial to the one where Vader is just sort of stressfully contemplating you striking down Luke and then just physically comes to the conclusion to throw you. But as you well know, audio of him yelling no
Yes.
A couple of times happens. Do you have any preference when you watch? Did you grow attached to the old version? Is there anything about that even when you watch it do you have any preference, really?
I don't know. I suppose I would. I don't know about. There's something about the word no which seems a little weak. I just, you know what I mean. I suppose if I could have perfected a terrible guttural scream, that might have been better, mixed with fury as well as anything else. But I don't really have a preference. The interesting thing for me, of course, with The Empire Strikes Back, was George said, well, we're going to put you in this now, since it is you. I've never even met you, you know, when we did Empire Strikes Back, and it was Clive's voice, and we don't quite know who the actor was. The rumor is it was a New York lady in a monkey mask or something like that, but I think we better not go there. However, it wasn't me until one afternoon in Sydney when he put me in. It took about 2 hours. But what I had in that, interestingly enough, was the mask that they developed for the Emperor in the prequels, not the facial construction that was in Return of the Jedi. So I always felt that that wasn't quite right. It still was pretty good, and it's in a hologram, so you know, that covered it to an extent.
Hello.
Hi.
I've always wondered with y'all as actors how much y'all pay attention to your characters or the universe once you're done with it. Of, you know, maybe collecting some of your figures, some of your friends' figures, or, you know, reading any of the stories that come later. Do you do any little bits of that, or do you know any of the other people involved that have kept up that way?
I don't think, you know, actors by and large, you know, they're pleased to play the part and happy to talk about it, as I am now, but they may keep one thing as a kind of souvenir, but they don't tend to keep things of themselves, because in a sense they've shaken it off, or they're doing other parts and so on. But their very close friends quite often build up collections, you know, which they, you know, invite you to sign now and again, which you're relatively happy to do. But no, I don't. I suppose you probably know in Star Wars nobody gets allowed to keep anything. Everything goes away into, you know, the museums of the future. And certainly that's true as far as scripts. You know, if you happen to hold on to a script, you know, you won't be living long in this world. The dark side will eventually get you. But not via me, I hasten to add. But I suppose if I'd been allowed to keep something, I would have asked if I could have kept that clasp that he keeps his cloak together with, which apparently was bought at a very cheap store one afternoon. Nobody, you know, realised that, oh my God, I've got it tied together, so I just go and buy something. So that quite often happens, you know, in the movie. You imagine years of thought and serious energy have gone into from the design, and that's usually the case with designers who are wonderful people, and their research is as important tool to them as anything else. But I have to know this was bought for, I don't know, 50p or something down the road one afternoon. And that amused me. So if I'd been allowed to keep something, I would have kept that. But no, it's in some hallowed hall somewhere else.
Hi, sir. Thank you for being here. I was wondering, I know you did a lot of stage and film prior to Return of the Jedi, and I was wondering if there was one particular character or villain that you think influenced the Emperor the most that you played.
I don't think so, really. When I was a kid, I always wanted, when we played games, I'd always wanted to be the bad guy. And if you'd asked me then, I would have said I wanted to be the worst guy that ever was. And then you would have realized that my dream came true. Because, it was, and when people used to say God Vader, you know, he's the apotheosis, that's a good word for Nelson, isn't it? Of evil. I can say, yeah, well, he's not a patch on me. So I suppose I've been lucky enough to get the odd prize in my career. And the one I prize the most is an award I got from Total Film, Villain of the Year. And I was very pleased to get that. And my predecessor the previous year was George W. Bush. So my competition, I hasten to add, that year was Tony Blair. And he was a poor second.
Hello, sir. So you worked with child Anakin in the first movie.
Yeah.
Teenage and adult Anakin, the second and third.
You
And,
made me sound 390.
and Darth Vader Anakin, the last three. Which was your favorite Anakin to work with?
My favorite Anakin, I haven't been asked that before, but I'm going to insult the other two, aren't I? By choosing. They were all good in their different ways. That's a politician's answer. And I'm sticking with it. Thank you for asking.
Hi, Ian.
Hello.
Out of all the scenes that you were in, which one would be your favorite?
That's easy. In Revenge of the Sith, there's a scene you probably remember in the theatre. We called it the opera scene for some reason when we were doing it. And that wasn't originally where it was going to be set. It was another office. And I have to say, all the offices that were built for Palpatine throughout the film were enormous and very impressive sets. I kept thinking, why don't they save a bit of money and do it digitally? But that was naive of me, because you don't save money by doing things digitally, you make it more expensive. And George said, anyway, I like the idea that every time people get more successful, they get a bigger office. So I always got a big, enormous office. And that scene in the opera was originally going to be in another very big office. And then George said, I'm bored with offices, what am I doing? And so I turned up one day and he put these two, I mean, we were against the green screen, of course, two thrones either side. He said, okay, it's a theater, it's an opera, you know, he's watching a ballet or something. So, he's watching a ballet, George? Yeah, you know, sort of, I don't know, sort of Sith ballet? No, I don't think that's obvious. What would a Sith ballet look like? Anyway, we ended up with some sea creatures or other, didn't we? Performing very well, but not award-winningly, I felt, when I saw the finished result. And of course I saw nothing then except a bank of people in the studio, some of whom are behind large screens. But I liked that the most, A, because it was in a theatre, and I thought that's one good thing I can say about Palpatine. He may be an evil, ghastly, dastardly person, but at least he goes to the theatre. And also it gave the scene an added tension, particularly with Aiden, I really liked, back to your question, I really liked working with. And it meant that I could, as it were, look out here while I was watching and talking to him. So it enabled me to do about 3 things at once. So that was clever. And it happened, you asked if I had any particular anecdotes. Well, I've led myself into one. On that afternoon that Sam Jackson had tried to do those terrible things to the Emperor, and I, of course, resisted. So you know, he fell through the window, and then I had to get the mask on for, you know, unlimited power. And George keeps saying, go further. I said, further? You can't be serious. No, more. So if any of you think that's over the top, bring George Lucas. But I thought, well, you can't, I mean, you know, when someone says unlimited power and really means it, you've got to mean it. And he's, you know, he's been under my face for all those years, and now he's got it out, and he's absolutely thrilled. So that's what he said. Anyway, to do all that, I had contact lenses in, which I usually did for that character, which stung a bit, but it wasn't a big deal. But I had 3 wind machines also driving themselves, not themselves, operated by people, towards me. And all of the dust in the studio went into my eyes and down my throat. So at the end of the day, and this was a Friday afternoon when we were due to shoot the scene in the theatre, I had dust in my eyes, and I was speaking rather hoarsely. And I thought, you know, it's the end of the week, we can do it on Monday. And also, Hayden and I hadn't had a chance to run through the lines. And George said, we're going to do it, I just want to do it. I'm sorry you haven't had a chance to rehearse, but it doesn't matter. We'll go through it a few times, and if you need a line, someone will give it to you, but don't stop. So I thought, right, I said, okay. But the other thing is, my voice is a little bit hoarse. He said, that's wonderful, because at that point, the character is in transition. Okay. You know, from this voice to that voice. It's sort of like that. So the fact I had a husky voice, he said, was very good. Didn't help me, you know. What I would have liked to throat sweep, frankly, that would have been nice. Anyway, we did the scene, I think, 20 times, with the cameras on me. And the competing factors in the room were a lot of was a sort of area of noise, because I think a lot of people had been invited that day. So the odds were really stacked against me. And a cell phone went off about 10 times. The producers, of course, it's always the producers. And all of that went on, but below me, just there and there, I can see them now, were two of the best cameramen in the whole of the world who gave me that utter concentration. And of course, Hayden, who was sitting just there. And I thought, right, okay, this is a challenge 20 times. I'm just going to do this. And interestingly enough, when you have these kind of challenges, often something happens. So at the end of the day, and I said, I suppose we'll be doing it all again on Monday. He said, yes, but we'll be on Hayden. We've got what we need on you. I was kind of relieved, but I thought, well, actually I've given you a lot to choose from. So that was a fairly remarkable day. Also, the other thing that was going on, it was the first assistant director's birthday, which was nice. And the person who happened to be dressed in a gold suit, that's your clue, was off stage preparing the champagne celebration. So as well as the mobile phones, the noise in the corner, my husky throat, the fact that I couldn't see, there was also a very irritating gold person rattling champagne bottles. But hey, you know, it worked. Oh, I see.
Alright. Okay, so how'd you start this stuff? The very beginning of this stuff you've been doing. How'd you start it?
What style acting, you mean?
Yeah, the acting.
Yeah, well, I was at school in Scotland, and I didn't really know what acting was. I'm a kid now, I'm about 10 years old, and I was quite a shy child. And we were doing this sort of end of term concert thing. And there was you probably know the song, it's actually almost the Australian national anthem, Waltzing Matilda. And the choir was going to sing that, and in front of the choir there was a mime, and the parts were a sheep, a tramp, and a waterhole. The waterhole was eventually played by a dinghy, and it's all right. And the sheep was played by a guy, I can remember his name now, called Alston Cather, who had severe asthma. And once he got his sheep thing on top, you know, you can imagine the coughing that went on. Anyway, they said, is there anyone in the class who would like to try for the part of the tramp? And to my astonishment, this arm went up like that. And I thought, that didn't come from me. Anyway, I went out to the middle of the floor and I did a little piece. Somebody said, you've got the part. And so that was me beginning to get a taste for it. It must have been really terrible. I can only remember vaguely jumping, it was the tramp to jump into the waterhole from the dinghy. And I pretended, of course, that I'd sunk right down when I hadn't. And this gesture came back. Because the final lines of the song is, you'll never take me alive, said he. So while the choir was singing that, I was doing this. And there was a girl in the class who I have to admit, even at 10 years old, I find quite attractive. And so I was interested to hear what her reaction might be. So I said, Leslie, what did you think? She said, well, it looked as if you had constipation. So that was my first serious review. But despite that, I went to drama school, and you know most of the rest.
Hi.
Hello.
When you were playing Palpatine, did you ever scare yourself really badly?
Only that first time I looked in the mirror, I wasn't going to be able to go on. No, of course I had to scare everybody else, you know. And usually when you're in front of the cameras in a big movie like that, you know, you feel fairly, you know, nervous. You want to get it right, and feeling nervous actually is part of acting anyway. I think it is. The terror plays a part. You hope it doesn't play too big a part, otherwise it would collapse. And so might the project, or certainly your involvement in it. But also I had that wonderful chair. You know, I had my power base. And George at one point when we were doing Return of the Jedi, he said, "This reminds you of anything?" And it didn't really. He said, you know, the Oval Office, Richard Nixon, right? That's the kind of guy I am. So that was very empowering. And also, that room was gigantic. And I was king of the castle. They were all down there, you know, so I felt powerful. And the other thing that made me, this is true, it's a bit of a joke, but it's true. My chair was, of course, supposed to work brilliantly by some machine means. Somebody pressed the button anyway. but it would never stop in the right place. You know, so eventually George was going. He said, "Ian, can you do that with your feet?" I said, "Okay." So I used to do it under this table. Yeah, thank God you can't see. So I would very seriously, as the Emperor, with all my power, I'd go, young Skywalker, you know. It's all true. And then when we came to do the prequels, you know, and George said, "You're going to do it with the feet again? Save some time." So yes, yeah. So Christopher Lee in front of me, you know, do it. That makes you feel a little less nervous, because you think, isn't this a crazy business?
Person on the side. Thank you.
Hi, Jim.
Hello.
What would you do over again? Is there a particular scene that you...
Oh, everything.
Everything you did all...
Yes, you always think you could do it better. Yeah. Oh no, they didn't use that bit, did they?
Was there any one particular thing that just still bothers you today?
No, I'd say it's all sort of washed over me, really. Oddly enough, the bit that I thought, from my point of view, sort of self-regarding, say it worked best, was that scene in the opera. I mean, in spite of everything, you know. I mean, it was sort of the in spite of everything that gave it kind of edge for me, anyway. And gave me, I think, a few more ideas when I was actually acting. I had a very good time on all of the films, you know, joking apart, but it was easier for me than it was for some of the others, because I didn't have to fight imaginary digital creatures. And I know what annoyed some of the others, and I would have been annoyed if I'd been in their position, was that, not that they, you know, quite often as actors we don't look at people because it's not convenient in the room. You have to look at a spot. You know, say we were filming now, and I was addressing all the viewers I am, there might be a camera angle where it was more appropriate for me to look at that light, imagining I was talking to you. And we do that all the time. That's not a problem. But usually you know who or what your focus is. And sometimes those guys didn't know what they were fighting. Ewan, for example, he would say, "Now, is this an ironic moment? You know, is this a sort of a couple of people I just brush off? Or is it a life and death moment?" And George, quite genuinely, wouldn't be able to tell him, you know, because that would be sort of constructed later. What happens then when you don't quite know what you're playing, that you offer to the editor lots of possibilities, and sometimes they can take things out of context. And if you watch that and you think, my goodness, if I knew they were going to do it this way, I would have done it that way. That can be very frustrating. That's when you feel disempowered. But that never happened to me. But as I say, it was easy with the character.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm remembering your magnificent performance in Faith Healer on Broadway.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm wondering, do you have a preference for stage or screen, and how does your work on stage inform your film work, and vice versa?
It's an interesting question. The second part's very interesting. I prefer working in the theatre, yes. I like the live experience, like we have now, because anything can happen. You know, you learn the script, by and large, the moves are the same. But your other actors are on, you know, and you are on a different wavelength. And you've done it before, but you'll never do it the same twice. And that's the excitement, mainly because the audience is never the same twice. So the atmosphere of the whole thing is completely different, and frankly, you're more in control. You're editing, as it were, your own performance as you go on, not surrendering into a box which will be edited later. Now that's fine, that's what film is, you know, you have to accept that. That's good. But it was very interesting, the play you mentioned, Faith Healer, is well, it's sort of what we tried to avoid using because we thought it made it sound boring, but it is a series of monologues. In other words, actors come on in character and talk to the audience at some length. And my character was a sort of sweet, disappointed, but loving manager, really, theatre manager. And he talked directly to the audience. And I could do that every night, and every night the audience was different. And the part was written to be funny, and it was also written not to be funny. So to be in control of those moments, as sometimes were, to make people laugh and then make them not laugh, or bits which are funny, you suddenly decide, well, maybe they're not funny tonight. So you can change. That kind of control and power, I suppose, is the answer to your question, why I like theatre more than film. But film has its own excitements, and you know, what they capture is what's happening in the moment. And sometimes that can be amazing, sometimes it can be dull. And sometimes you can do one take and you think, I hope they don't do it again, because I don't know what happened that time, but I don't think it'll ever be as good. And you may be completely wrong, you know, because you don't see it. And you're just being photographed, your feelings and your thoughts are being photographed. And you can't judge really what effect it's having. But that's also completely different from theatre, and I enjoy it in its own way. But yes, if I had to choose theatre every time.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
My name's Arlene. I'm currently streaming right now. Oh my god. I'm so excited.
It's a white hood. I don't know.
So my question to you is, if you had your Emperor character as a female, how different do you think they would be?
I was waiting for the second part of your question. You're leaving it there? Okay. Well, of course, that's impossible to answer, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe that's a question for you. No? That's cruel. That's cruel. And it's also political. Yeah, no, I should do better than that, shouldn't I? I don't know. Would she be that different if it were a woman? The interesting thing about, and I know that, you know, we talk about these things much more readily, thank goodness, now than we used to, transgender and all the rest of it, whether it be, you know, in terms of acting parts or just life. The interesting thing about the face, the Emperor's face, is that I kept thinking, this might have been sexist of me, but I think as people get, if you happen to live to 140, whatever it is, it's sort of, your body changes. I mean, I think your whole sort of gender slightly changes too. It becomes something altogether other. And I remember I did toy with the idea for about 5 seconds that the Emperor's voice might not be very low, it might be very high. Is that something like that. But I thought, yes, I thought it might get a laugh, so I thought go for depth. But there's absolutely no reason why the Emperor shouldn't have been an Empress, with all of the degrees of malevolence and cruelty that the man was capable of. It's interesting, coming up in the London Theatre, if you get a chance, I think it's October onwards, is a performance of King Lear with Glenda Jackson. And that will be extremely interesting, not least because she's a wonderful actress and hasn't acted for a long time. As you probably know, she's been a member of the British Parliament, Labour member, for a number of years, and it's very courageous of her to go back to the stage, and she's almost the right age to play the part. And I also think, not to be unflattering to Glenda, who I know quite well, I think she'll look great. I think she'll look just right. And she'll play it not as a woman, I imagine. No, she'll play it as Glenda Jackson, playing King Lear. And I think that will be absolutely fascinating. It's already provoked some silly reaction in the press, you know. If Shakespeare had wanted a woman, he would have written it for a woman, you know. But, well, he wrote lots of young parts for women, which were played by boys. So that argument doesn't really hold up. She's a great actress, a great Shakespearean, and I think that will be very, very interesting. And I think the qualities she will bring as a woman to that part will also illuminate the play in a way that perhaps a man couldn't. Please don't ask me what these are.
Hi, it's such an honor. In Star Wars 7, The Force Awakens, we first meet leader Snoke.
Yeah.
His face is all deformed and a little weird and kind of a bit like the Emperor's. And in Star Wars 3, whatever it's called, I forget. I'm just a little nervous.
Don't worry, I've never seen.
You hear the Emperor talking to Anakin about Darth Plagueis,
Yeah.
how he was so-called murdered,
Mm-hmm.
maybe he isn't, by by his apprentice. Maybe the apprentice used force lightning on him, and that's how his face is all deformed. What is your opinion on Leader Snoke being Darth Plagueis?
That's a very good analysis of what a lot of people are thinking. Well put, if I may say so. I haven't a clue, really. I don't know. I was surprised to see it. Very good and very interestingly digitally realized art by Andy Serkis. And I was a little surprised at how sort of like the Emperor he looked. So I guess there is some kind of backstory there going on. But like everybody else in the world, except possibly Kathleen Kennedy, I don't know. And I guess all the people working on the new movies don't know either. And they won't know until they've together evolved, you know, the latest script. But it's a very interesting theory. And it would be terrific if in some way, terrible thing to say really, but the Siths lived on. And I think the Star Wars universe will just, doesn't have to move entirely sideways to accommodate them.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm also really freaking out right now. Palpatine has a lot of really tense scenes, and I was wondering, like the scene where right before his death with Luke and Vader. I was wondering if, with those tense scenes, did the pressure ever kind of crack and people just started laughing?
Yes, a lot. Yes, and particularly with Mark Hamill, who's a terrific guy and a very good friend, but likes to laugh. And he also likes British comedy. And I don't know if you know this, but there was a very famous, very funny English comedian called Tommy Cooper, who was a magician whose tricks always went wrong. That was the source of his comedy. And so when he was doing abracadabra, he would go, just like that, you know, like that. And that's just like that, in standard English. And of course nothing would happen. And Mark was a fan of Tommy Cooper, so when I was doing that sort of thing, occasionally the other side of the carriage would go, just like that, just like that. No help at all. You know how some actors say to the other actors when you're doing your close-ups, they don't turn up. If only Mark had stayed in his dressing room. However, we had a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Next.
Hello, sir. I would like to ask about a production of the Scottish play that you had a chance to participate in 1979 with Sir Ian McKellen and Judi Dench. I just must imagine that so much talent gathered together in one place on such an amazing play must have produced some very memorable moments in the stories. Do you recall anything of that production?
Quite a lot, actually. Yes, this is Macbeth, which started off its life in a very small tin hut in Stratford-on-Avon called The Other Place, taken out of a Shakespeare quotation when Hamlet is being rude to Claudius, when he talks about the difference between heaven and hell, and Polonius' body, whom he's just killed, he says to Claudius, go see him in the other place, meaning hell yourself. So this tin hut in Stratford was called The Other Place. And originally it was just a store, and as happens if you've got a space around a larger space, quite often people want to do things in it. So over the years, The Other Place had a reputation for doing small-scale work. And that was where Trevor Nunn, who did his first small-scale Shakespeare, and both Ian and Judy did their first small-scale Shakespeare. I don't know. I think I'd done The Tempest there already, so I was familiar with the space. And so was the sadly late, both Bob Peck and Roger Rees, who played Macduff and Malcolm, respectively. And it was the hottest summer ever at Stratford-on-Avon. And we were rehearsing the play with minimal scenery. In fact, no scenery. We had orange boxes that we sat around on. And there was a sort of wooden opening in the back, and that was it, really. And they decided to spend no money on that production, so we found costumes from the store and all the rest of it. And we worked well, and I remember thinking that Ian and Judy were going to be very good. But they weren't particularly happy. And we did our first preview, and a very famous actress called Peggy Ashcroft Dame Peggy after it was in the audience. And she came around afterwards and she said to Ian that she couldn't hear a lot of it, which is ridiculous because we were very close. But he was feeling that he needed to take it right down. He used to play in large theatres, so he had to play very small in a small theatre. And then we had a lot of previews, and it sort of gained in strength. And then a very fine actor called Nigel Hawthorne and a very fine writer called Tom Stockwell happened to see the play the same night, and they came around in tears somehow because these are men who cry very often. So we thought, well, we're getting somewhere, obviously. And then it opened, and it was the most enormous success. And then while we did it in London, we did it 2 places. First of all, the Warehouse Theatre, and then at the Young Vic. And while we were doing it at the Young Vic, it was filmed for television during the day. So we got on a bus every morning to go down to, I can't remember where it was, maybe it was Plagueis. And then the bus back every evening to do the play. And so we never stopped doing it. And that gave it a tremendous sort of momentum. And also when we came to do it on television, we'd done it so many times in the theatre, we didn't have to worry about the usual things like, will we remember it, where it was stand. It was in all of our blood. So it ended up, I think, being a reasonable record of the theatre experience. But of course, you know I'm going to say this, it was better in the theatre.
When you were fighting Mace Windu, you lost the lightsaber. Where did it go?
That is a mystery that remains with us to this day. I think it went to somebody in Australia. I don't know the answer to that. But it was, as I said earlier, it was a very interesting day fighting. And all the guys, of course, have been training madly, including Sam. And I've been training badly. I only knew, of course, that I had to fight about 2 weeks before. Because the scripts always come too late and so on. But I did my best. But what was so impressive was the skills of both Hayden and, of course, Ewan. Ewan is a master swordsman. And, of course, the other great former master swordsman in that movie was Christopher Lee. So I was surrounded by absolutely brilliant fencers. So I didn't feel too bad when they didn't come up to their standard. But the interesting thing about Hayden and Ewan in that big fight, of course, it's counting the sequences in the movie. You have to keep the action going, and we move from one location to another. But when they filmed it right through, God knows how many times, and it was thrilling, brilliant to watch. And always the studio crew, when they finished the sequence, applauded because it was just mesmerizing. And I suggested that when we were, going around being interviewed about the movie and so on, that they should take their sabers with them and show the audience that fight. But that didn't get any takers. But you would have seen how brilliant they were, as brilliant as any of the early people like Errol Flynn and so on. They're just, there have been Olympic gold medalists in fencing, but maybe a little more exciting.
Thank you. Little person over here.
Why are you called Palpatine?
I think George probably read it on the back of a newspaper somewhere. He was always coming up with strange names that sometimes he'd just seen somewhere. I don't know, it's not one that's easy to pick apart. Sidious is an easier one, because insidious, as you know, means somebody who sort of nasty and worms his way into something. So that sort of fitted very well. But Palpatine, I don't know. I mean, he certainly didn't have palpitations. I mean, I may have had now again before a take. But I don't know the answer. But I'm sure some people have got some theories, so I'd love to hear about them.
Thank you. First one is Tom.
So we had Ben died in episode 4, and then Darth dies, effectively killing off your character as well, and then Solo comes back for 7 to be killed by his son.
Yes.
Do you have any wishes for how any of the remaining characters from 4, 5, and 6 might be killed off in later films?
Don't tempt me. What did happen to Jar Jar Binks? I didn't kill him. I wanted to. That was the Emperor just most restrained. He was on my side, I think, wasn't he, at one point? Yeah, Yeah, and then they cut him out and everything. I have to say about Jar Jar Binks, and I always say this when his name is mentioned, and I know I'm the only person who's mentioned it, that he was played by a wonderful actor. I mean, he was created by the human being before he was digitized. His name is Ahmed Best. He was extremely gifted, extremely funny, in the way that Jerry Lewis is gifted and funny. And I thought, well, if only it had been Ahmed doing it, I think that, people would have perhaps fallen in love with that character. And also the way Ahmed spoke it made a lot of sense because of his particular jive. And when it was that digital creature, some people find it a little bit offensive. I didn't, but I can understand why they might. He did come to a sad end, I believe. It's called The Cutting Room Floor, and that was probably the saddest end. About the others, I don't know. I mean, do we know that anybody's really dead these days? I know when you sign on to a television series, or you're always waiting for the next script to find out if you're dead or not. Never mind what kind of lines you might have to learn, or if the scenes are any good, if you get to work with your favorite actress, or any of these kind of things. You just think, are they going to keep me alive? And I can't say too much about it, I'm afraid, but I'm recently involved in something, and it looked as if death might be imminent. And the actor I was working with said, no, these days, they can always bring you back. You can always be your own ghost. And look what happened to Bobby Ewing, so it's always possible. So I would hesitate to speculate about the future death of anybody, really.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 8 minutes left. And for those of you who are still waiting, if we don't get to you, it's because of time, but that doesn't mean that we don't love you. It's just that we run out of time. So, person on this side.
Oh, hi Ian.
Hello.
So I have 2 questions. So one of them being that someone mentioned your voice technique using or speaking through your stomach. Are there any details you can share with us about about the technique so someone could learn how to speak like Palpatine?
I don't know. I'm lucky. I have a voice that can go over a couple of ranges. This is not because I've worked very hard at it. I've just got it. Because I don't work very hard, frankly. I've got a bigger chest in relation to the rest of my body, so there's a lot of resonance possibility there. And I can speak high and I can speak low. And once I started to do the voice, I mean, you have to watch it, really rip your larynx, but I felt sort of comfortable in it because it felt it belonged to the character, so it was never really difficult to do. But there were days on set when George said, can you go a bit deeper? So I'd maybe over-relaxed it. And it doesn't really come from the stomach, I don't think. I don't know where it comes from. It sort of comes as if you're about to throw up. And you just manage not to. It's just sort of there. And then of course you can cheat a bit and make it a little bit as if you were slightly doing the same. You got to watch that though, because it might just seem ridiculous. Some people think it is.
Thank you very much. And I've been given the signal that we're out of time. But I know. But I was pleased, like for you to give.
There's another one tomorrow, but I'll only say the same thing.
Give Ian a round of applause.